Welcome, all you wiretappers out there, back here in the studio with our favorite ATF agent, Ignacio Esteban. Welcome, Ignacio.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for having me again. Like to be
great.
on here.
It's great to have you back. We're going to have you back some more. You're an expert on about every facet of organized crime, I think.
Appreciate it. I enjoy it. I enjoy studying and researching it. And I had, of course, my own personal experiences.
Right. So you've got a combination of your expertness that you've studied and your own personal experiences. You makes you the ideal guest for me. And folks, Ignacio has a ton of books out there on every aspect of organized crime and a variety of other subjects that you might be interested in. I'll have links to his author page in the show notes or in the YouTube down below. So take a look at that. And today we're going to talk about the Yakuza. Now, I started watching this show on HBO Max called Tokyo Vice, and I was kind of getting into it. It's pretty interesting how the Japanese Yakuza is almost like kind of an integral part of society, much like the mafia has been in the United States for a long time. They socialize with their neighbors and they know people in the government and they tend to want to corrupt them, but they have this kind of working relationship with everybody in society. So I just thought it was fascinating. I looked around for an expert, and guess who I found? My friend, retired ATF agent Esteban.
There you go, Gary. Thank you.
Let's talk about the Yakuza.
Sure. Yeah, I was the same thing that inspired me. I mean, of course, remember Black Rain. Remember some of the other movies that used to back in the 80s and 90s. And Yakuza, it's always something that fascinated me also. And they've always been in the media. Of course, I've seen intel reports, being with ATF. I've seen all different organized crimes. And I've seen them. They have I would say, significant enough in the United States. They're very big in Hawaii, California, San Francisco, LA, New York City, and of course in DC area. And anytime you see a large Asian population, there's always a few Yakuza. And I'm going to tell an interesting recent big arrests that happened in Southern District of New York and Manhattan, in reference to a huge case. And I'll talk about that in a second. But about the Yakuza, I started dabbling. I had done a few books already. By the time I got to the Yakuza one, I had done organized crime with the Italian mafia. I've done the one percenters, and I was doing the street gangs and all that. And I saw the same show you're talking about, and the book that came out from, I think his name was Jake Adelstein, who had written it. And he was I was reading about him also, that he was a beat reporter assigned to a Japanese paper back in the 90s. And I think he was the first American to have done that, and then to be embedded with the local police to really study the Yakuza, criminal underworld. And so that was kind of fascinating. He learned Japanese. He became very in the culture and everything else. And he wrote a book about it. And I think it takes part in the 90s. His experience was in the 90s and I think early 2000s. And then he wrote the book, and then it got picked up in the movie. So I saw the same thing you did. I saw the trailer, I saw the previews. So I said, you know what, I'm going to do my own little research. And I wrote my own little book about it and stuff. And I found out. I mean, there's those. And what my conclusion, reading and studying it, was that Yakuza is pretty much almost done. Its best days are way behind it. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, membership was 180,000. I mean, it was an enormous organization. I mean, it's been around for almost 300 years. I mean, it's one of the oldest organized crimes we had active in this country. I mean, you think of the Yakuza, you think of the Irizami, these guys that love to do these full body tattoos, and they have things involved up to your ankle, up to your wrists and ankles, and they have meaning. I mean, they have the fish there, the dragon. When they show those guys who want to have like a fish spawning up to the dragon, that means they want to be a boss one day. When they're street level, now they want to become a boss one day. They have their gods and everything else, and everything has meaning with their tattoos, but it takes time and extremely painful. I mean, these guys do it by hand. So anybody knows anything about tattoos, that's extremely very painful. And they use bamboo needles or steel needles. Very painful. So these guys have taken, that's part of the historical side of the Yakuza. And of course, everybody knows about, maybe not, but your audience, about when they shorten their pinky fingers from some of the other fingers.
Yeah, what's up with that? They cut off part of their pinky fingers. Does everybody do that? Or
to the digit right here.
Yeah.
So you see these guys are missing a lot of that. Now that's a sign that you're Yakuza, because the average Japanese person doesn't really do that unless you're Yakuza. And that's a sign also, gives people a heads up, hey, you're part of that. And they like to cover their tattoos up to a certain point, so that you don't see it. So if you have a suit on or a long sleeve shirt, you can't really see it. But once you take it off, it's full body type, what they call the irizami, the full body right there, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, and they do it because I guess in different theories why I guess it started as a samurai tradition. They claim they evolved from the samurais, and that's what they claim some of them do. And on the sword, I guess the bottom pinky on their big samurai sword was a problem, so that's why they were cut half it so it fit better on the grip. That's the historical side of it. Then they said later it was for atonement. If you messed up, you have to pay your boss with that. It symbolizes you had a mistake or as a debt. So I found that to be also interesting. But the new generation really doesn't want anything to do with it because the Japanese laws. This is why it's really been, and they've fractured big time within what I was studying. I mean, obviously you had the Yamaguchi. I mean, they're different clans, and the Yamaguchi clan. It's like saying, for your audience who doesn't know, like La Cosa Nostra. You have the Gambino family. You have the different parts, different families in New York City, or what have you. The same thing applies. But Yamaguchi is like represents like 3/4 of the members. So it's really big, and they recently had a huge split. I will say about 4 or 5 years ago, that became Kobe Yamaguchi. So, and that's like a younger generation who's just split away from the older generation because they really don't want to embrace all of this that was going on because it shows they become like pariahs. The Japanese government has cracked down immensely with some of the strictest laws targeting them. So it makes it almost being a Yakuza almost illegal, pretty much. You involve any sort of violation. Oh, you're also Yakuza, you're getting some serious time. You're extorting people, you're committing violence, you're involved in all this stuff. The victims and the government can sue now your boss of the clan, and they have some huge civil suits. So it's really shows. And on top of that, they make it illegal for any business owner to sell any known Yakuza, which you can tell you guys the way they are, any cars, phone, any property.
Really?
So you're also held accountable. So they're making it pretty hard. I was talking with my research. I saw an interesting documentary on Vice where they interview, and obviously Jake Adelstein, he's involved in this documentary, which was pretty cool. And they're interviewing these guys about how harsh it's gotten. And it's like, and a lot of these guys were members for years, and they walked away. They're trying to find a new life for themselves because it's getting that extreme right there. So I think the numbers, maybe even less than 10,000, if that, because it's just the Japanese government has made it so hard in cracking down.
Tokyo's red light district, a place that was once synonymous with the Yakuza.
Oh man, that used to be a great nurse-themed sex club. Sad.
It used to be what?
A great nurse-themed sex club.
Nurse-themed sex club.
Well, it's like, it was sexual massage, but it was a nurse theme.
You like your dress-ups?
I didn't say I like dress up.
Who are the Yakuza?
The Yakuza are 22 different designated organized crime groups that make their money in Japan from gambling, extortion, drug dealing, prostitution, child pornography, blackmail, fraud increasingly, and any other crime that you can think of. They used to have limits on what they would do and wouldn't do. They don't have any of those limits now.
Why do you think the Yakuza are in decline?
Well, they're in decline because the laws have gotten better. They criminalized paying off the Yakuza. Yakuza now can't collect money from people. They can't get a phone. They can't get a hotel room. They can't get an apartment. And they can have people substitute for them, but when they get caught, they go to jail. And that, more than anything, has made living life as a Yakuza so unpleasant that people are leaving in droves.
And so has the U.S. government, by the way. During the Obama administration, they started some major sanctions from OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Control, within the Department of Treasury. They started targeting individuals and business dealing in the United States that had Yakuza connections.
Oh, really?
And really cracking down on them. So that was because, and I think it had to do something with his connection also with Hawaii, him being from Hawaii.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest area Yakuza where you've seen it in the United States is in Hawaii. And then the other ones, and I'll tell you the story in a little bit, but that's, I think, part of it. And it's just snowballed to where I think, just in my opinion, just like my other books, I don't see the Italian mafia, the one percenters, where they used to be either.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of these major investigations has decimated them also, and they're nothing what they used to be. And I put that in my books also, based on the cases and loyalty. And they're also cooperating against each other. They just had in Japan the first case ever, a death penalty case for a head of a crime boss in Yakuza.
Oh, really?
They're going to execute one. That's the first time in the history they're going to do that. So and between the lawsuits, executions, they're getting serious time. Just like in our country, we start cracking down on these guys, and with the Capones and the Gaudis, and they, one after the other, we start cracking them down, and they start cooperating. I think they learned they were part. Maybe they served a good purpose. Maybe in some ways, some people said yes, some people say no. But at the end, they had more policing, and they hired more policing, and that replaced them. And then they didn't even come. But at the end, they do extort a lot of money from a lot of these mom and pops businesses. So they take advantage of people. They're involved in prostitution, human trafficking, drug trafficking. They're involved in violence. These aren't good people. And one of the interviews I saw, and in my book, former crime boss said, they've really gotten guys who are staying are really, really bad criminals. These are the guys who are really trying to help the average person. These are just criminals, really thugs and out there. So, and they're gang culture. And we see the same thing. Some of the guys hardcore are the ones that stick around. The other ones say, you know what, it's not worth it.
Yeah. I used to say when they came out with those sentencing guidelines, you could make somebody tell about their mother when you're looking at 50 years in the penitentiary and you're about 30 years old. And they know that they're going to have to do 48 of that 50, man. You can, those professional criminals, they'll start singing like crazy when they're looking at that. So it looked to me like on that show that they made a lot of money off of loan sharking too. That was kind of the premise of the show. That so far what I've seen is that they were making money off of loan sharking. And Japanese culture is not really a big drug culture, a big gambling culture, I believe, but
gambling was huge too. Yeah, they were getting involved, and they maybe not want to consume it, but they know how to traffic it. And they know how to find consumers.
Yeah, send it to the United States. We know how to consume it.
We know how to consume it, and all over Europe. I mean, these guys have really, really good networking, and they do that. So this is an interesting case here, and your audience can look into it also. When I was researching, I saw the criminal complaint out of the Southern District of New York and Manhattan, and this was a high-ranking Yakuza member, and this was about a 3-year investigation, DEA, DOJ, and other components. Dealing with this organization. He was Yakuza, but he was here and he was meeting. Well, I wish I would have done this, This was a great undercover deal. He was meeting with Yakuza guys in Copenhagen and also in Bangkok, Thailand.
Wow.
So they had different meetings with the organization. And there's a picture of this is a great picture. If you have a chance to take a look at it, you have this guy, high-ranking Yakuza guy with a missile launcher perched on his shoulder, right? Because these are the weapons. He's brokering these huge weapon deals for rebel groups in used to be called Burma, which is Myanmar now, and Sri Lanka. And I'm talking about, I mean, the laundry list, if you look at it, is enormous. You had like 5,000 AK-47s. You had 1,000 M60s, machine guns. You had surface-to-air missiles. I mean, he had mortars, hundreds and thousands of ammunition. I mean, the list is unbelievable what this guy wanted. And he's willing to pay, because of his connections, 500 pounds of heroin, 500 pounds of meth. So these guys have some pretty good contacts.
Yeah.
So that was a heck of a investigation. So you look at the pictures from Copenhagen. They had the meetings in Copenhagen out there. So I was reading the complaint. I was looking more online. You can find more and more about it. And then they arrest these guys, and the case is going to be out of the Southern District of New York. But it just shows and they always went to Bangkok. I mean, these guys have contacts all over the world.
Yeah. The
smaller group, I mean, obviously it's not as big, but the smaller, harder group is still pretty active. And they're involved in a lot of white collar crimes. Yeah, this guy's doing trafficking. He's with the rebel groups, but they also are terrorist groups also. I mean, that's all around, because look at Sri Lanka situation right now. It's atrocious because groups like this arming these guys to cause the government to collapse, which is pretty much what they want. The same in Burma. So this is a situation you're dealing with. These guys are arming these kind of groups. And he had those kind of connections. So it's a worldwide. It was lucky enough that the agent did it, the undercover. And he also had local authorities from these countries helping with the investigation, which was good. These guys look for some serious time because you're dealing with machine guns. You're dealing with, these are unregistered weapons, surface-to-air missile with the drugs and everything else, like 30 years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's big time. That's life. That's basically life for guys like that. That's in the federal system. Like I said, you do about 90% of your time. There's no good time to speak of.
That's a nice thing about the federal system. No parole. No early parole.
Yeah.
No.
So this was an agent, an ATF agent.
ATF, I think, was involved in some extent. It was a joint DOJ, but the agent actually was from DEA.
Oh, DEA. Wow.
But I said, I wish I would have done some of that. That's a great case. It's up my alley. And I did a lot of and reverses, stuff like that. And especially with the whole international collection. And you're doing Yakuza, you're doing Europe, you're doing Asia. They're all over. But you're right. They're not just involved in loan shark. I mean, extortion is big too. Extortion is a big thing. They're shaking down. I was reading another case, major casinos out there. And when they still have some teeth and people still fear them, but because policing is getting more aggressive and the laws are being stronger against them, it's all falling apart. It's all falling apart for the Yakuza. And that was my conclusion after I saw everything going on, especially this case here. That's a huge slam dunk for the federal government, our country. And if you really want to take a case where it's amazing, in my opinion, after 9/11, you look at the Southern District before and after. Because I prosecuted some cases that started in Florida, we end up in New York, and we say, you know what, which is the better venue? It appears Southern District, New York, it's the better venue to prosecute cases.
Oh, really?
So they got a real good case, an aggressive case out there. So I think things change a lot. Mindset, you think, it's a more maybe blue state, but in that area, people respect and understand law enforcement, especially what happened after 9/11. I think you see that.
Especially that transnational law enforcement too. Because that's kind of a new thing. I remember hearing a talk at a LEIU Intelligence Units convention, and a futurist, this was like 25 years ago, and he said, well, the common thing, the La Cosa Nostra is out, but transnational is in, and that's what you guys are looking at, is transnational organized crime.
And that's what these guys are now.
Yeah.
Yakuza is definitely transnational. I mean, these guys were dealing with everybody. I mean, you're dealing with rebels in Sri Lanka, rebels in Burma. These are all criminals. Yeah. They have access to a lot of drugs. There's no doubt about that. He had samples, he had supplied and everything else. So, I encourage your audience to look at him, maybe post something. But that's an amazing picture. High-ranking Yakuza member, and he's got it perched with doing that right there,
really?
and he's looking right at the missile launcher. And that's an amazing picture, man.
I'll have to look that one up. You can find that on the internet. Just Google. Yakuza.
Oh, it's everywhere. Yeah, put that guy in there. That's a great picture put there. I mean, that says it all right there. And he's being prosecuted in this country.
Look for that on the Gangland Wire podcast Facebook page, folks.
That's an awesome picture, man. So their membership has dwindled so much. It's just incredible. And so going back to the whole new generation and the whole battle, which is pretty interesting between the Kobe Yamaguchi and the other one, it's a break. They don't want to be labeled because they know they can't do business. They can't function now in society. So they don't want the tattoos. They don't want to do any of the other things that they have to be doing. They're taking more, a lot involved in more white collar. They want to cut back on the violence, the attention. Crypto, they like to move along cryptocurrency. They want to do a lot of things that it's more easier, modern than the old ways, because they know it's just not worth it. So that's the battle I'm seeing within what I researched and what I saw within the Yakuza, if it survives. I mean, it's been around for 300 some years, but it might not survive the century. That's for sure. It's just one of the things, just like the Cosa Nostra. I think it's done in this country. It's something's remnants left, but it's nothing like the 30s and 40s. That's for sure.
It's because of the way people have moved, and it's other opportunities out there for folks and children. These guys in this organized crime realm, they're like businessmen who are criminals. And then they want to see something better for their own kids. And so they get them to go to college and become lawyers and doctors. And you see that in the Italian, the Cosa Nostra Mafia, at least in Kansas City. And I understand it's in other cities too, that they really encourage their kids to get out and do something else.
Yeah, that's what I did see that too in a documentary, that the guys who are leaving, they want to find other careers.
Yeah.
So one guy he went to school and became a photographer. And so he's trying to change his life from being a gangster. So now he's a professional photographer, and he's there taking pictures of weddings and other things. So, they know this life is no good.
Yeah.
It ends, you know how it ends. I always say life of a gangster ends two ways.
Yeah.
By death or long imprisonment.
Yeah. Locked up or covered up, they say.
Covered up. Yeah, that's right.
Locked up or covered up.
Covered up. That is so true. But the gangs I do see thriving. That's not the case for all of them, but in our country, and I write books about it. Obviously, I don't see Yakuza thriving here anymore. They're about done. I don't see La Cosa Nostra. I don't see the one percenters. I think they've been hit hard, bad, taken care of. But what I do see is it just doesn't go away. And it's the street gangs.
Yeah,
the street gangs. No matter how big, and I've done big case too. No matter how big, it just keeps on coming. And I've always said it's a difference out there with the drugs and the cartels. And the Mexican cartels is probably the strongest I've ever seen.
Yeah,
bigger than the Colombian cartel. Probably the strongest they've ever been in the history of Mexico. What we're seeing now with the Sinaloa and Jalisco fighting. And then, of course, you got big other ones, Gulf cartels. You got other big ones out there, too. Las Zetas, who are also, they fractured up in different factions. But what I'm seeing there, I just think is just getting worse and worse and more violent. And I've talked in my other books there. But if we don't address the newer generation, who just keeps on getting erased in that culture, we don't take them out of that environment, this cycle will never end. It would just get worse and worse.
What you were saying about the Yakuza, it's kind of a parallel with the street gangs in the United States. And of course, I cut my teeth. We've had to form the LA Boys Task Force here in Kansas City because there were so many of these guys and they were competing for this territory that they started moving out. They'd have relatives back in Kansas City or Tulsa or Wichita, Portland, other middle-sized cities to maybe even a little bit smaller cities. And they had this direct connection back to Colombians through California, through the mother lode of cocaine. And there's all these markets, and they moved to all these cities and brought their culture with them. And I was in on the start of that, and the tattoos and the tagging and all those visible things that these gangs want to say, hey, I'm part of this, something bigger. And of course that, and we didn't pass laws, but when somebody had gang tattoos, or we knew that they were, they had that graffiti around them that was gang graffiti, they got dealt with a little bit different. And everybody knew that they were part of a gang all the way through the criminal justice system until they went to the penitentiary. And then, of course, they just went back into their prison gang self there. So it's, I just see no end to it in the United States as far as the street.
I don't either. I don't either.
It's bigger than us. I'll tell you that. It's a huge societal problem that only the society as a whole is going to have to try to figure out how to deal with. I don't really know, but it's.
I think in other cultures, in other countries, the way they dealt with it, and I found it interesting, was that once the parents are considered gang members or violence, the children are in danger. They consider that a dangerous environment to be raised in.
Yeah.
And then you have to remove them and put them like in foster homes. You have to get them out of that culture, because if not, they're going to be the same thing. I mean, we talked to other people who were raised in that, and they were forced into it, right? Mm-hmm. You're raised into it. You're raised in a mafia family. Most likely you're going to be a mafioso, right? They're going to bring you into the business. So the best thing as a child is, like I said, other parents, right? You have to take them out of that. So if we don't come up with a plan like that, it's just going to be future generations, and it's just costs a lot of money with incarceration cases, violence. We all as a society pay a price.
Yeah. And we're not, I don't think in the United States we're ever going to pass those draconian laws like they're able to in Japan. Japan's it's a different, setup, different government, different culture, different society, much more family oriented and shame based, that we don't have any shame in the United States anymore. Let's don't go down this political trail here, because it's an endless thing. But I know it's a bummer.
Yeah, no, it makes things a lot harder. And then on top of that, you had the drug consumption. So on top of that, they're education, right?
Right.
A lot of these guys don't go to school; they're drop out. And then on top of that, you have all this money, drug money, That's easy money for them.
Yeah.
And that's another bait there. So it'll make it, if we could somehow curb our drug addiction as a country, I think it'll make it harder for the street gangs to survive because they find other things to do. So it's a complicated web. And I just write about it. Obviously we investigated before and worked on it, and make all these arrests, but it's always somebody else. It's always something else, right?
Here's a quick story to tell you about the drug business in the poor communities. This kid came here from LA, right? And he moved to Kansas City, a lot safer. He had some relatives here. He got a job in a Taco Bell, and he started saving his money. Saved his money, and he bought like an 8-ball, and he cut it a little bit, and he sold it. And so then he bought another one. And so then he bought, so many ounces, and he cut that a little bit and he sold it. And then he was up, when we popped him, he was up to he'd just gotten his first kilo in when we popped him. And so we got him in, and he told us, he said, this is how I did it. It was much better paying job in the end than Taco Bell. He thought in the short run, but in the long run, he'd been better to stay at Taco Bell and try to work up into management.
That would have been better for him. He gets more benefits. But some of these guys, like I said, they don't think big picture.
No.
I used to do undercover, and I got my book, ATF Undercover, and I talk about some of these situations. And we used to do a lot of cases with active home invaders, right? Mm-hmm. Home invaders that are looking to do a lick, an armed robbery of a cocaine stash house.
Oh,
right? Yeah. These are guys looking to do it. So you think of this kind of mindset. These guys aren't thinking, they're not thinking pension plans. No. They're not thinking savings. They're thinking, I want to do a lick. I want to hit this house. And I know their guys are armed in there who are protecting the load for whoever it belongs to.
Yeah.
And they have to do that. And you deal with these kind of guys. You have conversation meetings. These are direct conspiracy cases. And you take these guys. You need a SWAT team to take these guys down. These are big things like that. But you're right. These are the kind of guys who don't think about stuff like that. No. They're ready to say, you know what? I can rip off and get about 30 keys. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Why would the heck I want to go to work for it?
I'm set for life.
I'm set for life, man. I got 30, 20 keys, whatever. Why would the heck I want to work? Well, maybe you go through the door, you get blasted in the face. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I'd like to not take those kind of risks.
Yeah. And sooner or later, they're either going to get, as we said, locked up or covered up. They're going to do something that locks them up for the next 30 years or more, or they get blasted in as they go through the door. So it's,
oh my gosh. Yes. And
it's a crazy life. All right. Esteban, Ignacio, I really appreciate you coming on here and telling us a little bit about the Japanese Yakuza.
I appreciate it. I like
other things, and we'll. I hope you'll come back, and we'll talk about some other things in the future. Okay.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary, for having me. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, folks, that was most interesting look at the Japanese Yakuza and a variety of other things, how it compares to street gangs in the United States, the tattoos and all this stuff in common. I like that guy. I'm going to have him back every once in a while because he's done a lot of studying on a variety of different organized crime operations, and he looks at he just looks at a lot of different things about that. I like that. He finds the good stories about it. So don't forget, look out for motorcycles. Get on my YouTube site. Got a lot of good stuff on there. Subscribe to it. I recently did, speaking of motorcycles, I recently did a tour of the Evel Knievel Museum, which was over in Topeka, Kansas. And then I got onto it because one of the managers over there, one of the guys that I think is on the board of directors or trustee or something, got hold of me. He's a big Evel Knievel fan. He asked if Evel Knievel had anything to do with the mob, and I started asking around. One of my local sources says, when he came to town, a bunch of mob guys would be all over him, taking him out to go drinking and partying with him, and he was a big drinker and a partier. Matter of fact, he got popped here in Kansas City for trying to. He hit on a policewoman who was doing a prostitution sting operation. They arrested him for soliciting for prostitution. I found out from Red Mamet in Chicago, he was connected to a guy named Wayne Bach and Frank Squeeze, both of who were big, bad leg breakers for the outfit. He had something to do with them. He used one of them. I'm trying to find out more about that. If you know anything more about that Chicago Evel Knievel outfit connection, well, let me know. And I'm going to try to put together, I've done a Freedom of Information Act request on Evel Knievel. If it doesn't cost too much, why I'll get it, or at least I'll get the free part of it. If it's too voluminous, you never know. And so anyhow, thanks a lot for listening in. Don't forget, if you've got a problem with PTSD, get hold of your Veterans Administration. Just Google Veterans Administration and PTSD, and they got a hotline. And most importantly, keep coming back. Thanks, folks. Back. Thanks, folks. Back. Thanks, folks. Back. Thanks.